Hey there, good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with the Bible. I apologize, it's been a little while since we did our last video. I've had some painting projects going on and some various things that I've been doing around the house. And so I've been kind of pulled in different directions. But we are in Psalm 104. It is, let's take a look here, 35 verses, and we're actually going to get through the entire thing. There are some points where we can kind of not skip but buzz through pretty quickly different things for various reasons. So if you're just joining us for the first time, if this is the first time you've caught me on video, we've been doing what is called a journey through the Psalms. It's my attempt to do a study from beginning to end. Sometimes we cover the whole psalm, sometimes we break it up depending on how many verses there are. And there are some fantastic nuggets of truth and nuggets of motivation, inspiration, profound things that we maybe overlooked before even reading through it. So without further ado, let's go to Psalm 104. It says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, O Lord my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty, who coverest thyself with light as with a garment, who stretchest out the heavens like a curtain, who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters, who maketh the clouds his chariot, who walketh upon the wings of the wind, who maketh his angels spirits, his ministers a flaming fire, who laid the foundations of the earth that it should not be removed forever. Thou coveredst it with the deep, as with a garment the waters stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled, at the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. They go up by the mountains, they go down by the valleys into the place which thou hast founded for them. Thou hast set a bound that they may not pass over, but they turn not again to cover the earth. He sendeth the springs into the valleys which run among the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field, the wild asses quench their thirst. By them shall the fowls of the heaven have their habitation, which sing among the branches. He watereth the hills from his chambers, the earth is satisfied with the fruit of thy works. He causeth the grass to grow for the cattle, and the herb for the service of man, that he may bring forth food out of the earth, and wine that maketh the glad heart of man, and oil to make his face to shine, and bread which strengthens man's heart. The trees of the Lord are full of sap, the cedars of Lebanon which he hath planted, where the birds make their nests, as for the stork, the fir trees are her house. The high hills are a refuge for the wild goats, and the rocks for the conies. He appointed the moon for seasons, the sun knoweth is going down. Thou makest darkness, and it is night, wherein all the beasts of the forest do creep forth. The young lions roar after their prey, and seek their meat from God. The sun ariseth, they gather themselves together, and lay them down in their dens. Man goeth forth unto his work, and to his labor until the evening. O Lord, how manifold are thy works, and wisdom hast thou made them all. The earth is full of thy riches. So is this great and wide sea, wherein are things creeping innumerable, both small and great beasts. There go the ships, there is that leviathan, whom thou hast made to play therein. These wait all upon thee, that thou mayest give them their meat in due season. That thou givest them thy gather, thou openest thine hand, they are filled with good. Thou hidest thy face, they are troubled. Thou takest away their breath, they die and return to their dust. Thou sendest forth thy spirit, they are created, and thou renewest the face of the earth. The glory of the Lord shall endure forever. The Lord shall rejoice in his works. He looketh on the earth, and it trembleth. He toucheth the hills, and they smoke. I will sing unto the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. My meditation of him shall be sweet. I will be glad in the Lord. Let the sinners be consumed out of the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless thou the Lord, O my soul. Praise ye the Lord. So our pastor recently, probably several weeks ago, had spoke on being in awe of God, pointing out that as we as believers sometimes find ourselves comfortable, even complacent with the familiarity of things of God, whether it be nature or just, everything that God does, we kind of overlook it. It kind of becomes mundane or just kind of ordinary. So we forget to have this awe of God. And so, I mean, we have to admit that occasionally we lose the excitement we once had in our relationship with Christ. I mean, everybody, I think it happens to everybody. And I mean, I know I have. I have sometimes have not had the same zeal or excitement I had at the beginning. And I think that's true for all of us. When Scripture says that, you know, it's remembering your first love, I guess you could say. Remembering the moment where something was different. And I think we forget that sometimes. I think we forget to be in awe of God. This psalm is a great example of the truths that can remind us of how worthy the Lord is of wonder and reverence. And these seemingly ordinary things that we see every single day, the psalmist here points them out as something we can remember as being a reason to stand in awe. But I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to actually begin with verse 31 and then read back to the end of the chapter as we study this. So again, I read the whole thing, but now we're going to look at 31 to the end, and then we'll go back from the beginning. It says, "The glory of the Lord shall endure forever. The Lord shall rejoice in his works. He looketh on the earth, and it trembleth. He toucheth the hills, and they smoke. I will sing unto the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. My meditation of him shall be sweet. I will be glad in the Lord. Let the sinners be consumed out of the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless thou the Lord, O my soul, praise ye the Lord." So that is where we're beginning. The reason I'm doing that is because the psalmist is declaring the reason. He explains the awe that we should have in the beginning. He's declaring the everlasting endurance of God's glory. Nothing can destroy his glory. Nothing can diminish his glory. The Lord shall rejoice and does rejoice. See, in his works, because everything the Lord does is absolutely perfect and righteous. So verse 32, he looketh on the earth and it trembles, he touched the hills and they smoke. This describes the appropriate response the earth itself has to God. And then 33 to 34, I will sing unto the Lord. He goes down to 34, it says, my meditation of him shall be sweet. The writer explains his response to this truth. This is that awe we should have, the recognition that nature itself is subject to the Lord's very look. The Lord looks on the earth and it trembles. He touches the hills and they smoke. There's a natural response creation itself gives to the very truth of God. Creation, excluding man, recognizes God's authority. Now, did you ever have a dog, most of you probably have, that you can just look at? You make eye contact and the dog somehow instinctively knows or responds in some submissive way. See, we have a dog, and if you just look at him out the window, you don't even have to be outside. You look at him out the window and he will stop what he's doing and run and go into his doghouse for no reason. He's not ill-treated, nothing like that. But somehow, if you look at him or you tap on the window or something, he stops what he's doing and he runs back and he goes into his doghouse. Most of the time. Other times, he's so excited to see me that he can hardly contain himself. So those are the two polar opposites. He either runs and hides for no reason whatsoever, or he's so excited he can't stand still. That is, in fact, for me, another response that we should have in the presence of God. This excitement, this uncontainable thrill that the Lord is there for me, the Lord seeks me, the Lord wants to have fellowship with me. But this is that image of creation and submission to the Lord. And for that recognition, the psalmist will appropriately praise and sing. In verse 3, I will sing unto the Lord as long as I live, and I will sing praise. He says he will sing praise as long as he lives. What is profound in verse 34, my meditation of him shall be sweet, I will be glad in the Lord, is this attitude of his meditation. The psalmist could have meant two things by this statement, in my opinion. One, that his meditation or thoughts would be sweet, being pleasing to the Lord, or that he is committing himself to refrain from having any negative thoughts of God whatsoever. Everything I think about God will be sweet. Everything I think about God will be good, I guess you could say. He's determining not to have any ill thoughts about God. And I think that is a true statement to make, because there are times, I'm sure, some of us have moments where we're angry with God, or we're confused with God, or we have this doubt, or this, hey, you didn't do it the way I was hoping you would do it. And this is, I think that's natural. I don't think the Bible tells us we can't have that kind of emotion or kind of response. But I like the indication here, if it is, that the psalmist is declaring to himself, I will not do that. I will not go in that direction. I will not allow myself to have any thought of God that is not sweet. Both of these are valuable. Now, let's be honest. When God allows or does something we disagree with, do we ever have, even for a moment, a negative thought? I'm certain we do. I think that at a lot of times God will allow something in our lives that is relatively unpleasant, and we may have a negative thought. We may have this, really? What? Why? What? But if we go back to my whole root of Philippians and the contrast, or the connection between Philippians and Romans 8:28, in this everything works for the good of those who love him, it's this understanding that everything God allows or ordains in my life is there for a purpose, or there is a purpose that can be taken from it to ultimately make me better, make me more like Christ. And if we hold on to that truth, all of these seemingly difficult circumstances that we're allowed to go through can ultimately give us a blessing of some kind. Now, I would like to think that the psalmist here is referring to the second example, the I refuse to have any thoughts about the Lord that is not sweet. But he would most assuredly be fulfilling the first example by using that one. Needless to say, this perspective would cause one to be glad, as he says in the last part of that verse, I will be glad in the Lord. If my meditation of the Lord is sweet, whether it be pleasing to him or having no negative thought whatsoever, I would assume that I would have gladness in the Lord. Now, verse 35 is not a closing prayer for revenge in this psalm for anyone specific, because nothing in this psalm suggests that there's anything negative going on. But I think it's a desire to see the Lord's ultimate establishment of the world in its rightful position and perfection. And then he closes with a call for praise. Bless the Lord, bless thou the Lord, O my soul, praise ye the Lord. This is also the first time in the Psalms we find the use of hallelujah, or praise Jehovah, and certainly in light of the true awesomeness of God. Now, going back to the beginning, where we will find example after example of the reasons we should be in constant awe and wonder of God. Now, we don't have an author indicated in this psalm, but it is generally agreed upon that it is in fact David, mostly because of the language. He tends to use a lot of these different statements quite often, especially with Psalm 103. He says, bless the Lord, O my soul. And then Psalm 104, bless the Lord, O my soul. Could have been David, could have been somebody who maybe knew David spent some time with David, understood the same things. We don't know. But again, it is generally agreed upon that it is David. He's declaring the greatness of God straight out from the beginning. Now, from verse 2 to 30, we find the authority of God over creation. John 1:5 says, "This then is the message which we have heard of him, and declare unto you that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all." That is, if we look at verse 2, it says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not his benefits." What we will find as we move on in the psalm is this poetic declaration of the creation account from Genesis. The Lord spans the heavens, one simple motion, as one who pulls the curtain, stretching it across the plane of existence. And I think, and if I go back to verse 2, I was reading 103. So it says, verse 1, "Thou art very great, thou art clothed with honor and majesty, who coverest thyself with light as with a garment, who stretchest out the heavens like a curtain." Okay, that's that link to John 1:5. I had a hiccup for a moment there. In verse 3, "Who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters, who maketh the clouds his chariot, who walketh upon the wings of the wind." These are upper chambers and chariots. Now, the upper chamber of a house was for privacy and seclusion, representing involvement with separation to his world. The chariot signifies the Lord's governance of his creation. Not only does the Lord govern creation as we see it, but he rules the angels and charges them to whatever task he sees fit. Verse 4, "Who maketh his angels spirits, his ministers a flame of fire." He guides and controls and oversees everything. And this is quoted in Hebrews 1, confirming the deity of Christ. Now, the psalmist declares in verse 5, "Who laid the foundation of the earth, that it should not be removed forever." The truth that it was God who set in place all of creation. He set it in place with laws and boundaries that cannot be overturned. Nothing that God established can or will be moved unless God himself moves them. Now, what I find next is profound. From verse 6 to 13, the psalmist paints for us in great detail the strategic hand of God in the plains of the waters of the earth. The placing of the water. I scribble sometimes. The placing of the waters on the earth. Now, what I see here is sequential. It's the effect of the Lord's creation on the seas a little bit at a time. David points out, assuming it's David, two occasions here in verse 6. "Thou coverest it with deep as with a garment, the waters stood above the mountains." The creation waters of Genesis 1 and the flood in Genesis 9. Verse 7, "At thy rebuke they fled, at the voice of thy thunder they hasted away." This verse reminds us of the Lord's decree for the flood waters to cease and reside. The waters responded and hasted away in instant obedience. God said, "That's far enough, time for you to go," and that was it. In verse 8, "They go up," speaking of the waters, "by the mountains, they go down by the valleys unto the place which thou hast founded for them." This image here is dictation of where the waters are to flow. God says, you're going to go that way, you're going to go that way, and you're not going to touch any of this. God has created the boundaries for the flowing waters. Mountains and valleys, every place thou hast founded for them. God has decided this is where this is going to go. As the waters subsided from the flood, the waters that remained went where God pointed them and nowhere else. In verse 9, "Thou hast set a bound that they may not pass over, that they turn not again to cover the earth." This is both the law of nature, where God does not permit the waters to go anywhere he hasn't determined, and recalling of the promise not to flood the earth again. In verse 10, He sendeth the springs into the valleys which run among the hills. Now, the scale is getting smaller. He began with the whole earth being flooded down to the mountains and the valleys. And now we're looking into the springs into the valleys which run among the hills. This smaller as we get going. We've gone from the world flood, again, the mountains and valleys as springs, to verse 11. They give drink to every beast of the field, the wild asses quench their thirst. Now we've got purpose. We've got worldwide flood. We've got flood diminishing. We've got water flowing in different directions wherever God decided, in order to provide drink for the beast of the field, to provide drink for the animals. The water that flows causes trees to grow in various places, as we see in 12:13. By them shall the fowls of the heaven have their habitation, which sing among the branches. The watereth the hills from his chambers. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of thy works. He causeth the grass to grow for the cattle, the herb for the service of man, that he may bring forth food out of the earth. All of these different things are happening because God has decided to send water this way. Place for the birds to nest, place for the animals to drink, place for you and I to get water. Verse 13 again says he waters the hills from his chambers. We find the composer and conductor declaring the movement of the waters from his upper chamber that satisfy the earth. God is here saying, this is where you're going to... I see this picture of this conductor causing waters to go wherever he wants them to go for whatever purpose he has. He provides grass for the cattle, herb for man, in order that we can grow food and provide for our own. These verses almost answer the detail of do all the things for the glory of God. If I can remember all of these different things. I read a study one time, and I may have mentioned this before, about how do we do all for the glory of God? How do I do the most mundane, simple things for the glory of God? Well, the example that was in the lesson that I looked at was drinking orange juice to the glory of God. It's kind of an interesting thought. But the writer was saying, if I remember that God provided the orange, if I remember that God provided the tree that provides the orange, if I remember that God provided the rivers that we see here, or the waters to provide for the tree that provided the orange, to provide me with orange juice that has vitamin C and all these different things that are good for me. If I remember that God provided the water, God provided the flood, provided, and so on, then I can drink orange juice to the glory of God. It's a long process, but it's there. It's possible. And then David can give thanks for the wine God has provided, the oil, and the bread for strength. The psalmist is using the basics of the natural world and turning it back to God. He sees all these simple things as just as the orange juice, and going back to standing in awe of God for it. Verse 16, the trees of the Lord are full of sap, the cedars of Lebanon which he hath planted. This is leading into a picture of provision of shelter for verse 18. The high hills are a refuge for the wild goats, and the rocks for the conies. He plants the trees, providing nesting for birds, and the hills for the goats. Everything that we see here is, in a sense, provision for something else. God has caused creation itself to both work independently and together simultaneously. In verse 19, he appointed the moon for seasons, the sun knoweth is going down. He has provided indicators for us for seasons and times. We read that in the beginning of the Bible. Giving darkness for the nocturnal creatures, whom govern nature by night. In verse 21 and 22, we are introduced to the young lions who roar after their prey and seek their meat from God. The sun arises and they gather themselves together and lay them down in their dens. The psalmist points out that while even though the lion seek for food, it is God who supplies it. Now, Clark points out something about these few verses that I find quite interesting. He says, And as it would not be convenient for man and the wild beasts of the forest to collect their food at the same time, he has given the night to them as they prepare time to procure their prey, and the day to rest in, whom man labors. They rest, man rests. They labor, man labors. Let me read that again. When man labors, they rest. When man rests, they labor. So we have conflicting schedules, which is fantastic. I'm not going to go hunting for my food while the lion's out hunting for his, because one of us is going to get eaten, and it's probably not going to be him. The declaration of praise, because of the recognition, comes here in verse 24. O Lord, how manifold are thy works, in wisdom hast thou made them all, the earth is full of riches. In the middle of this description, the psalmist can't help but stop and shout at the wonderful work of God. These are innumerable creatures in the seas, ships governed by the waves, small and great beasts, the leviathan, all who wait for the Lord to provide. Verse 28, that thou givest them, they gather. Thou openest thine hand, they are filled with good. This is the picture of the Lord feeding the world by his hand. Also pointing out that if the Lord were not to open his hand, the world would not eat. In verse 29, thou hidest thy face, they are troubled. Thou takest away their breath, they die, and they return to dust. Again, here the psalmist is pointing out creation's dependence on God for life and breath. And if the Lord were to deem necessary, our breath could cease at any moment, and we would indeed return to dust. It is by the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed. The fact that you and I are breathing at this very moment is because God said, yeah, that's okay, you can have more time. But he also creates life by his Spirit. Verse 30, thou sendest forth thy Spirit, they are created, and thou renewest the face of the earth. Now you see, for all these reasons, it is appropriate for us to stand in awe of God and his marvelous works, his provision, his organization of nature. Without him, we would all cease to exist. Now, I told you we could buzz through that relatively quickly. And so my challenge, my reminder, my urge, my whatever you want to call it, even to myself, is to remember, to find a way, and there are many infinite ways, to rejoice, to praise God, to stand in awe of his creation. Because it's hard to be negative when you're standing in awe of God. So stay tuned, and we will get to Psalm 105, hopefully sooner than later, so we can like, subscribe, do those things you do, and we will see you on the next path of this journey to the Psalms. Thank you, and God bless.